For over a century, a persistent claim has echoed through certain Zionist narratives that Palestine was a land without a people, for a people without a land. The argument goes that before Jewish immigration in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the land was barren, deserted, inhabited only by a few nomads and tribes with no national identity. Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir famously said in 1969, "There were no such thing as Palestinians. They did not exist."
But I say there is no such thing as a distinct Palestinian people.
Her words encapsulated a broader effort to erase the historical and cultural presence of a people. Yet ironically, Golda Meir herself once held a British Mandate passport that identified her nationality as Palestinian. The contradiction is striking. The same entity she denied existed was the one she was legally registered under.
I'm a Palestinian. From 21 until 48, I carried a Palestinian passport.
So today we're going to examine this myth, not through slogans, but through records, censuses, and eyewitness accounts. We'll look at how Palestine was governed, who lived there, and what the data, both Ottoman and British, actually reveal. The notion that Palestine was empty emerged in the late 19th century, when early Zionist thinkers like Israel Zangwill popularized the phrase, "a land without a people for a people without a land." It was a powerful slogan, one that justified Jewish settlement by implying no one else had a legitimate claim to the land. But as historian Rashid Khalidi clarifies in Palestinian Identity, this was less an observation and more an ideological construction. The presence of hundreds of towns and villages were deliberately ignored to frame the Zionist project as one of revival rather than displacement. From that point on, the narrative wasn't just political, it was psychological. To build a homeland, one had to first erase the image of those already there. Before the British, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire for 4 centuries, from 1516 to 1917. Contrary to the claim of an empty land, Ottoman records show a deeply rooted and organized society. The Ottomans conducted systematic censuses and tax surveys, known as Tahrir Defterleri, dating back to the 1500s. These weren't symbolic records, they documented every taxable village, crop, and household. And according to historians Wolf-Dietrich Hütteroth and Kamal Abdulfattah in the historical geography of Palestine, Transjordan, and southern Syria in the late 16th century, the country was not an empty land, it was a densely cultivated and well-populated region with thriving towns and villages. Their study of Ottoman archives from 1596 recorded over 600 villages in the regions of Jerusalem, Nablus, and Gaza, with a combined population of roughly 300,000 to 400,000 people. That's the late 16th century, 300 years before the first Zionist Congress. And moving into the 18th and 19th centuries, the administrative system of the Ottomans evolved. Palestine was divided into the sanjaks of Jerusalem, Nablus, and Acre, all fully functioning districts with local governance, courts, mosques, schools, and markets. By the mid-1800s, new modern Ottoman censuses were introduced. These counted not only taxpayers, but also religious communities and professions. Historian Justin McCarthy, in his The Population of Palestine, reconstructed the population from these archives and found a consistent pattern of growth. In the 1550s, at just above 300,000 inhabitants. By the early 1800s, circa 360,000. In 1870, aggregating at 450,000. And by 1914, hitting 700,000 inhabitants. Far from empty, the land showed steady demographic expansion for centuries. McCarthy concludes, there was no major population vacuum in Palestine before Zionist immigration. The region was continuously inhabited, primarily by Arabic-speaking Muslims and Christians, with Jews forming historic communities in cities like Jerusalem, Hebron, Safed, and Tiberias. Travelers of the time confirmed this picture. In 1868, French geographer Victor Guérin wrote, "It would be an error to believe this land is deserted. Every valley and hillside shows traces of villages, terraced cultivation, and olive trees." So when Zionist leaders described Palestine as desolate, they were not reflecting reality. They were crafting a narrative that would justify colonization. So when the British took control after World War I, they conducted the first modern census of Palestine in 1922. It showed 757,000 residents, of whom nearly 89% were Arabs, both Muslim and Christian, and around 11% were Jews. By the second British census in 1931, the total population had risen to 1 million, with the Jewish share increasing to about 17%, largely due to immigration. Those numbers alone shatter the myth of emptiness. In fact, the British records show hundreds of towns and villages, many with populations in the thousands. In Jerusalem, the population numbered 62,500, while in Jaffa it was at 47,000. Haifa stood at 24,000, Nablus 15,000, and Hebron's population was listed at 17,000. Each had mosques, churches, schools, hospitals, and industries. Olive oil, soap, citrus, textiles, making Palestine one of the more economically diverse regions of the Arab world at the time. Even British administrators who were sympathetic to Zionism could not deny this. Sir John Hope Simpson, in his 1930 report on immigration and land settlement, wrote, "The country is not capable of absorbing, without dislocation, the large number of immigrants arriving. The Fellaheen population already cultivates nearly all the arable land." So, by British testimony, the land was already full, not of wilderness, but of people. I really do appreciate you taking the time and watching the Khalidi Chronicles. Please do join our community by subscribing so that you don't miss out on any content regarding the Arab and Muslim history, identity, and modern condition. And if you really do enjoy the channel week in and week out and would like to support us even further, please do join us at our YouTube membership program as well as on Patreon. Thanks again. Now let's pause for a moment and visualize what that life looked like. In Jaffa, bustling port markets connected Palestinian merchants to Egypt, Lebanon, and Europe. Nablus was known for its olive oil soap exported as far as Damascus. Bethlehem crafted olive wood carvings for pilgrims from across the world. Jerusalem, already a mosaic of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, was a spiritual and administrative center. French historian Jean-Baptiste Chabot wrote in 1913, "Palestine's towns are full of activity, with artisans, traders, and cultivators reflecting a society as ancient as it is dynamic." The image of a barren wasteland fades quickly when confronted with such reality. So now I'd like to return to Ms. Golda Meir's statement. There were no such thing as Palestinians. She said this in 1969, over 2 decades after the 1948 Nakba, when more than 700,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes. Her denial was not just a personal opinion, it was a state narrative. If Palestinians didn't exist as a people, then their dispossession could not be considered a tragedy, only a historical correction. And as I said, Meir's own biography reveals the irony. When she emigrated to Palestine in 1921, she carried a British Mandate passport, identifying her nationality as Palestinian. At the time, Palestinian was the term used for all inhabitants, Arabs, Jews, and others, under British jurisdiction. As historian Ilan Pape clarifies in The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, the denial of Palestinian peoplehood was not about history, it was about politics, about erasing a collective memory that stood in the way of Zionist legitimacy. Thus, the idea that Palestinians never existed was never a conclusion drawn from evidence, it was a strategy of erasure. Another core Zionist argument claims that the Arabs who lived in Palestine were not a distinct people at all, merely part of the wider Arab world. According to this view, the people of Palestine were no different from the Arabs of Jordan, Syria, or Lebanon. Therefore, the argument continues, they had no special or historic claim to that particular land, since they were simply Arabs who happened to reside there. This framing intentionally blurs the line between shared Arab culture and localized national identity. It's true that national boundaries and modern nations, including Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, emerged largely from the 20th century wave of nationalism after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. But the same logic applies to Palestine. As historian Beshara Doumani notes in Rediscovering Palestine, Palestinian identity did not spring from nowhere. It evolved through long-term social, economic, and political experiences tied to specific towns, villages, and the countryside. In that light, Palestinians were not invented in 1948. They were Arabs, yes, but Arabs of a particular land whose fields, dialects, family networks, and memories were rooted in Jaffa, Nablus, Hebron, and Jerusalem, not elsewhere. Their sense of belonging was deeply tied to Palestine itself, forming the foundation for the national consciousness that would emerge in the 20th century. Now, I'd like to take a step back and look at a broader picture. By the late Ottoman era in 1914, Palestine's population stood at around 700,000 people across roughly 26,000 square kilometers, a density of about 27 people per square kilometer. By the 1922 British Census, it rose to nearly 30 people per square kilometer, and by 1931 it reached 40 per square kilometer. To put that in perspective, Bulgaria's population in 1920 had 45 people per square kilometer, Greece had 42, Ireland had 39, and Sweden had 25. So Palestine's population density was comparable to, and in some areas higher than, several European nations of the early 20th century. And that's even applicable to back when the Ottomans controlled the area. This statistical reality makes the claim of barrenness absurd. The land was alive, cultivated, farmed, traded upon, and fought over. It had identity, culture, and memory long before any modern political slogans appeared. Even through war, exile, and occupation, Palestinians continue to assert their existence, not as an invention of the 20th century, but as the descendants of generations who lived, farmed, prayed, and built on that land for centuries. As historian Noor Masalha argues in Palestine, a 4,000-year history, the Palestinians are not an invention of nationalism, but an evolution of history, the continuous peoplehood of all who lived in that land under various empires and faiths. I would add the Zionist state as one of those empires and ideologies. So when one says Palestinians never existed, they're not just denying a political identity, they're denying the very record of human continuity that every empire from the Ottomans to the British carefully documented. The evidence, Ottoman registers, British censuses, travelers' diaries, and modern scholarship converges on one truth. Palestine was never empty. It was a tapestry of towns, farms, families, and faiths. Arab, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, all part of a shared geography. The myth of emptiness was never historical, it was political. It served to erase so that something else could be built in its place. But records don't lie. And as long as those records survive, in Ottoman archives, in British census books, and in the memories of those who will call that land home, so too does the truth. Palestine existed, Palestinians existed, and they still do.